a quiet neighborhood, a locked house, and a family that would never wake up to see the new year. New Year's morning of death. The Harvey Family Murders. January 1st, 2006, Richmond, Virginia. A street wakes up to a silence no one will ever forget. Behind closed doors, in a house no one had reason to fear, 4 lives end in silence, and a mystery begins. Without forced entry, without witnesses, and without a clear explanation. What happened behind those doors would haunt this city for years to come. January 1st, 2006, the first morning of a new year in Richmond, Virginia. The city was moving slowly, weighed down by the quiet exhaustion that follows a long night of celebration. Streets that had been alive just hours earlier were now nearly empty. Fireworks were no longer in the sky. Music had faded. Most homes were dark, still holding on to sleep. It was a holiday morning, the kind that usually passes without urgency, without alarms, without fear. In a modest residential neighborhood, the Harvey family's house stood exactly the way it always had. Curtains drawn, no lights visible from the outside. A calm, ordinary home blending into a calm, ordinary street. But inside that home, something was already very wrong. As the morning hours passed, attempts to reach the family began to fail. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages were never returned. At first, no one panicked. It was New Year's Day. People slept late. Schedules were loose. The silence felt explainable. But as time continued to pass, the silence stopped feeling natural. It became noticeable, then unsettling. A family does not simply disappear from contact without reason. By late morning, concern had turned into a decision. Someone close to the family went to the house to check on them in person. The neighborhood gave no warning of what waited behind the front door. A few neighbors were visible outside, stepping into the cold air of the holiday morning. Cars were parked along the curb. Everything looked ordinary, calm, safe. The front door did not open at first. There was no answer when it was knocked on. No movement from inside, no voices, no signs that anyone was awake. And yet, nothing suggested a burglary, a struggle, or an emergency from the outside. The house looked intact, still, silent. When entry was finally made, the atmosphere inside the home immediately felt wrong. The air was heavy, unmoving, as if it had been sealed off for hours. The quiet was total. Not the quiet of sleeping people, but the quiet of absence. Room by room, the house was checked. Each step forward carried more tension than the last. There were no sounds of life, no television, no movement, no voices responding from behind closed doors. And then, the reality of the situation became undeniable. Inside the home, all 4 members of the Harvey family were found dead. At that moment, the situation shifted from concern to catastrophe. Emergency calls were placed. Police units were dispatched immediately. Patrol cars arrived within minutes, their flashing lights breaking the stillness of the holiday morning. The street was sealed off. Neighbors who only moments earlier had been starting an ordinary New Year's Day now stood frozen, watching in silence as officers moved in and out of the home. There was no screaming in the street, no chaos, just confusion and shock. Inside, investigators began documenting the scene carefully, and almost immediately, one detail stood out, a detail that would alter the direction of the entire investigation. There were no signs of forced entry. Doors were intact, windows were not broken. Nothing indicated that someone had violently broken into the home. Even more unsettling, There were no obvious signs of robbery. Valuable items were still inside. Nothing appeared to be missing. The house showed no clear evidence of a random intrusion. This combination of facts created a disturbing implication. The killer was closer than anyone ever imagined. If no one had forced their way inside and nothing had been taken, then the person responsible had likely been allowed inside willingly, which meant the killer was not a stranger crashing through the night. It suggested someone the family already knew. As news of the crime spread through Richmond, the sense of disbelief only deepened. 4 people, one family, found dead inside their own home on the very first day of the year. The timing alone felt unreal. A new calendar had begun. Yet for this family, everything had already ended. At this point, police had few answers and no public suspect. The weapon had not been formally announced. No motive had been identified. There were no witnesses. No emergency calls from inside the home during the night. Only the aftermath remained, sealed behind police tape. But one conclusion was already forming, long before any arrest would be made. This was not random. This was not a burglary gone wrong. And this was not the work of someone breaking in from the outside. This was personal. And the truth of how it happened and who was responsible would soon reveal a story far darker than anyone in Richmond could have imagined on that quiet New Year's morning. Before the Harvey family became a headline, before police tape surrounded their street, and before their home turned into a crime scene, they were simply a family living an ordinary life in Richmond, Virginia. From the outside, there was nothing about them that suggested danger, conflict, or chaos. They were not known for drama. They were not connected to crime. They were not a family anyone believed was at risk. The parents were described as quiet, responsible, and deeply focused on their children. Their lives followed predictable routines, built around work, school, and family time. Neighbors would later say they kept to themselves, not in a suspicious way, but in the way many families do: private, consistent, uneventful. The kind of people you see often but never really think about. Inside the home, life revolved around structure. Mornings followed routines, evenings were spent together. The children were the center of everything, shaping decisions, schedules, and priorities. To anyone watching from a distance, it looked like stability, the kind of life built carefully over years, not marked by turmoil but by repetition and responsibility. There was no public history of domestic violence, no record of ongoing disputes with neighbors, no pattern of visible conflict that would suggest something was wrong behind closed doors. If there were tensions, if there were arguments, if there were fractures forming beneath the surface, they were not visible to the outside world. And that is what made the crime so difficult to process in the early days. Because when investigators began looking into the family's background, they did not find chaos. They did not find reckless behavior. They did not find a trail of enemies. What they found instead was normal life: jobs, school schedules, daily responsibilities, quiet weekends. The kind of routine that usually protects people rather than endangers them. But normal life does not mean a simple life. Every family carries private struggles. Every home has its unspoken tensions. And as investigators slowly widened their focus, they began to understand that the most important connections were not in the neighborhood, not at workplaces, and not in financial records. They were inside the family's personal circle. Relationships that seemed ordinary at first began to take on new weight. Interactions that once appeared harmless were now examined for hidden meaning. Who had access to the home? Who was trusted? Who moved freely in and out without raising concern? Because the crime scene itself had already told investigators something critical. Whoever had entered that house on the night of the murders did not fight their way in. They were not treated like a stranger. They were not blocked by locked doors or broken windows. They were allowed inside, which meant the answers were not going to come from distant threats or unknown intruders, but from the people closest to the Harvey family, the ones who knew their routines, their habits, their schedules, and their trust. And as police began to map those relationships, one connection in particular began to stand out, not because it looked dangerous at first, but because it looked too familiar to ignore. By late morning on January 1st, 2006, the silence surrounding the Harvey family had reached a point where it could no longer be explained away by sleep, celebration, or routine. Calls had gone unanswered for hours. Messages had not been returned. For a family known to be consistent and reachable, this sudden absence of contact felt wrong. What began as mild concern steadily hardened into something more urgent. Eventually, someone close to the family made the decision to stop waiting and go to the house in person. The drive through the neighborhood offered no warning. The streets were calm in the way they often are on a holiday morning. A few cars passed occasionally. Some neighbors were visible outside, starting their day slowly. The atmosphere did not carry panic or alarm. It carried normalcy, and that normalcy made the worry feel even more out of place. When the car pulled up in front of the Harvey home, there was nothing to immediately suggest danger. The house looked exactly as it always had. The front yard showed no disturbance. The windows were intact. The curtains were drawn. There were no flashing lights, no raised voices, no indication that something inside had gone terribly wrong. It was the kind of house that usually promised safety, not questions. Approaching the front door, there was an expectation, however faint, that someone might answer. A parent still groggy from sleep, a child unaware that hours had passed. But when the first knock landed against the door, there was no response, no footsteps from inside, no shifting behind the walls. The second knock brought the same result. The quiet was complete. And at this point, concern crossed into certainty. A home where 4 people lived does not remain this unresponsive without reason. The absence of sound, movement, or acknowledgement created a moment where instinct overpowered hope. Something was wrong inside. Even then, from the outside, there were still no visible signs of a struggle. No broken glass, no forced doors, no open windows, nothing that neatly explained why the house had gone suddenly silent. That contradiction, a peaceful exterior paired with total unresponsiveness, only deepened the unease. As the decision was made to gain access to the home, the moment felt suspended between fear and denial. There is a brief space of time, just before truth is revealed, where the mind still searches for harmless explanations. That space existed here too, but it did not last long. When the door was finally opened, the shift in atmosphere was immediate and impossible to ignore. The air inside the house felt closed off, heavy in a way that did not match a normal family home on a holiday morning. There was no sound to greet the entry, no television humming in the background, no footsteps from a back room, no faint movement that might suggest someone was still asleep. The silence inside was absolute. The first steps into the house were slow and deliberate. Hallways that should have felt familiar now felt unfamiliar, stretched tight with tension. The light inside was dim, filtered through drawn curtains that had not been opened that morning. Everything in the home appeared to be in its proper place. Furniture was undisturbed. Personal items were where they were always kept. There was no visible sign of a struggle in these first moments, no scene that matched the fear that had built outside. Room by room, the house was checked. Each space told the same quiet story. No voices, no movement, no indication that life was still active inside. The longer the search continued without response, the heavier the understanding became. This was not a house where people were sleeping. This was a house where something had already ended. Even then, the absence of disorder was deeply unsettling. Violence often leaves chaos in its wake. Overturned objects, shattered glass, signs of panic. But here, those signs were missing. The calm inside the home did not feel peaceful. It felt deliberate, as if whatever had taken place had left the space behind in a controlled stillness. With every doorway passed, the weight of what might be found grew stronger. The tension was no longer about whether something was wrong. It was about the scale of what was wrong. And as the final rooms were approached, the last layer of denial began to fall away. Whatever had happened inside this house was not recent fear. It was already irreversible. The realization came not as a single shocking image, but as a slow, irreversible understanding. It unfolded through the house one space at a time, with each room confirming what the previous one had already suggested. The first body was found in silence. There was no dramatic moment, no sound to mark the discovery. Only the sudden and undeniable awareness that a life inside this home had already ended. From that point on, the search was no longer about finding people who might be asleep or unresponsive. It became a progression through finality. Each additional room brought the same conclusion: another life lost, then another. And finally, the full weight of it became impossible to escape. All 4 members of the Harvey family were gone. There was no single place in the home that told the entire story. Instead, the truth was spread across multiple rooms, binding the house together through loss. The absence of movement was no longer simply unsettling. It was now explained by death itself. What had begun as unanswered phone calls had led to the discovery of an unimaginable outcome. What made the scene even more disturbing was the lack of visible chaos. There was no sign of a desperate attempt to flee from room to room, no clear trail of panic through the home. The environment remained eerily controlled, almost as if violence had moved through the house quietly, without leaving behind the disorder that so often follows it. At that moment, any remaining hope dissolved completely. The home was no longer a place of concern or uncertainty. It was now a confirmed crime scene. The lives that had filled these rooms only hours earlier were gone, leaving behind a silence that no explanation could soften. The weight of that realization did not come with loud reactions. It came with a kind of numbness, the kind that sets in when the scale of loss is too large to process immediately. 4 people, 1 family, found dead inside their own home on the very first morning of a new year. And from that moment forward, nothing about this case would remain ordinary again. The house is silent now, but the truth has only begun to speak. They were safe inside their home, or so they believed. No forced entry, no strangers caught on camera, no warning heard in the night. What the investigation would soon uncover was not a break-in, but a betrayal. Was far more disturbing than a random crime. because the danger did not come from the outside. It came from within the circle of trust. Part 2 tells the story of how trust became the doorway to tragedy. Next on True Echoes. Who the Harvey family really was. What happened during the final hours of the night, and how the investigation uncovered a betrayal no one expected. The person they trusted most steps into the center of the investigation. Part 2, The Truth Behind the Door. The truth coming soon on True Echoes. What do you believe was the true beginning of the end? The night itself, the house without forced entry, or the person who was never questioned at first? Tell us what you think in the comments. We're listening. To be continued.